When it comes to how you perceive the world, the central nervous system is a key player. But your central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, would be pretty useless without a support network that keep them connected to the outside world. Your peripheral nervous system is this network. It puts your brain in touch with the physical environment around you and allows it to respond. This network infiltrates nearly every part of your body, providing the central nervous system with information ranging from the temperature of your skin to the position and movements of your limbs, to injurious events like the pain you perceive when you sprain your ankle, for example. The peripheral nervous system has an array of sensory nerve receptors that relay information about the world for the central nervous system, and each type responds to different kinds of stimuli.
Thermoreceptors respond to changes in temperature, photoreceptors to light. Chemoreceptors pay attention to chemicals, and mechanoreceptors respond to pressure, touch, and vibration. And then we've got specialized nerve receptors called nociceptors that, unlike those other receptors, only fire to convey pain, which is the main thing I'm going to talk about today.
In this lecture, we're going to trace a pain signal through your nervous system from the point of injury and the initial activation of those nociceptors through the steps of inflammation and ultimately, perhaps, hopefully, healing when the pain subsides. The difficulty about pain is that there is a lot we don't know. There is no specific pain center in the brain, no one place where pain signals congregate like there is for speech or for hearing, for example. A pain can surface almost anywhere in the brain. Sprain your ankle and the sensation will register across one set of brain regions. Hit it off a table and it will light up others. Then if you repeat those experiences, the patterns may change again.
So let's take that example of a sprained ankle. Well, the first step in perception of pain is a change in our environment. That is, a stimulus that activated some of your sensory receptors. In the case of a sprained ankle, it was a change from what was probably initially a subconscious feeling of the joint position sense of your ankle to a distinct feeling of discomfort when you rolled it beyond its normal range of motion, stretching and tearing the lateral ligament complex.
So your peripheral nervous system's mechano and nociceptors provided that base sensation, or awareness that something had changed when you rolled the ankle and tore the ligaments. You might remember from your study of human physiology how every neuron in your body has a membrane that keeps positive and negative charges separated across its boundaries, like a battery sitting around waiting for something to happen. Well, that stretching and tearing of your ankle ligaments is that something, and it snaps specialized nerve endings known as nociceptors to attention. You'll remember that some neurons have mechanically gated receptors that respond to a stretch in their membranes. In this case, that happens when the ligaments stretch and tear.
Meanwhile, other neurons have ligand-gated receptors that open when the damaged tissue released inflammatory chemicals like histamine, kicking off the inflammatory process. These channels allow sodium ions to flood into the neuron, causing a graded potential. If that hits the right threshold, it activates the electrical event that sends the signal all the way up the axon and gets one neuron talking to another, the action potential. When that action potential races down the length of its axon to the terminal, the message hits the synapse that then transmits it over that synaptic gap to another neuron that's in your spinal cord.
Recall that signals travel between neurons either by electrical or chemical synapses. The electrical ones send an electrical impulse, while the chemical ones, the ones I'm talking about now, first convert that signal from electrical to chemical by activating neurotransmitters to bridge the synaptic gap, before the receiving neuron converts that chemical signal back into an electrical one. Now, the signals from all types of pain are conveyed to the central nervous system, the spinal cord and brain, by two different types of fiber. Fast-conducting A delta fibers, which are coated in myelin, and slower-conducting C fibers. The swift A delta fibers give you the sharp ouch of the initial injury, while the slower C fibers give you the throbbing pain that follows.
Generally speaking, nociceptors respond to three kinds of painful stimuli: thermal, chemical, and mechanical.
Now, so far your body's response to the stimulus has been handled by the sensory or afferent division of your peripheral nervous system. This is the part that's involved expressly in collecting data and sending it to the central nervous system. But at this point, the responsibility changes hands because the pain signal has just triggered an action potential in a neuron in the spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system. And from there, it reaches an integration center.
At this stage, the response is taken over by the motor or efferent division. Once the integration center interprets the signal, it transmits the message to motor neurons, which send an action potential back down your leg, where it reaches an effector. And an effector is just any structure that receives and reacts to a motor neuron signal, like a muscle contracting or a gland secreting a hormone. From here, the motor neurons initiate muscular contractions that cause you to limit further damage, in this case, taking the weight off your now injured ankle until the rest of your nervous system gets engaged in the complicated tasks of figuring out what the problem is and fixing it. These are the 5 steps that your highly specific neural pathways go through to produce what's known as a reflex arc.
A lot of your body's control systems rely on reflexes like this. Immediate reactions that can either be innate or learned, but don't need much conscious processing in the brain. Recoiling your hand when you touch something hot is an innate or intrinsic reflex action, a fast motor response to a startling stimulus. Reflexes like these are so invested in your self-preservation that you actually can't think about them before you respond. All of the processing happens in the spinal cord, so that the control of muscles can be initiated before the pain is actually perceived by the brain.
Learned or acquired reflexes, on the other hand, come from experience, like how you learn to dodge obstacles while riding a bike or driving a car.
That process is also largely automatic, but you learn those reflexes when your system is trained by repeated exposure to them. Walking is another example of a learned reflex in many ways.
And reflex arcs stimulate some muscles while inhibiting others. For example, like I mentioned briefly before, when you sprained your ankle, the injured area will have activated motor neurons in your right hip flexors and hamstrings, causing your hip and knee to flex and your foot to lift up. But it also told the quad muscles on the contralateral leg to extend the knee and stand tall. And together, these movement strategies result in you taking weight off your injured ankle.
So you've got the stimulating event, the rolling of your ankle resulting in stretching and tearing of its ligaments, and then the reception of that signal, as the nociceptors in your ankle sense that stimulus, and then the transmission of that signal through your nerves to your spinal cord in a reflex arc, but also eventually up to the brain.
So when it comes to the brain, news of the ankle injury will have first arrived at your thalamus, the information switchboard of your brain. And this then would have split the messages and sent it to the somatosensory cortex, which identifies and localizes the pain, as well as the limbic system, which registers emotional suffering. A signal will also have been sent to the frontal cortex, which manifests as perceptual or conscious awareness of the pain.
So basically, although your body has been reacting all along, it's not until those pain signals hit the brain that you have the conscious thoughts of pain and the reasons or causes for it. Pain itself is a pretty subjective feeling, but the fact is we all have a very similar pain threshold. That is, the point where a stimulus is intense enough to actually trigger the action potentials in those nociceptors is pretty much the same for everybody. But you and I might have different tolerances for that discomfort.
When it comes to the classification and measurement of pain, there are many ways to do so, and these vary in type and validity from authority to authority. The most common category, the one we've largely been focusing on up until this point, is nociceptive pain, the pain we talked about in our sprained ankle example.
This is sometimes referred to as good pain, in the sense that it is the kind of pain that tells you that something is wrong. That part of your body needs a chance to heal. The challenge for the healthcare professional seeking to manage their patient's pain is identifying the source of pain, communicating this appropriately with their patient, and deciding on the most effective intervention, whether it be exercise, cognitive behavioral therapy, or a pharmacological intervention. The difficulty and maybe opportunity when it comes to treating pain is that it is actually quite mutable. It can be increased, attenuated, or even ignored by the brain, depending on the situation. For example, one study of patients suffering from angina showed that just having a sympathetic and loving partner significantly reduced the level of pain reported by participants.
Expectation is hugely important too. In one experiment, when subjects in pain received morphine without being told, its analgesic effects were greatly lessened. In many ways, we feel the pain we expect to feel.
In the absence of pharmaceutical perfection, people can manage their pain through cognitive behavioral therapies and exercise. The placebo effect also seems to have an important role in pain management.
The concept of the placebo effect has been around for a very long time. In the modern medical sense of something given for psychological benefit, it was first recorded in a British medical text in 1811. Neuroimaging has given some intriguing insights into how placebos work. In one experiment, people who had just had a wisdom tooth extracted had their faces massaged with an ultrasound device, and overwhelmingly reported feeling better. What was interesting was that the treatment worked as well with the machine turned off as on. Other studies have shown that people given a coloured tablet will report feeling better than when given a plain white tablet. Similarly, red pills have been perceived as being more fast acting than white pills, while green pills and blue pills have more soothing effects. Placebos even seem to be effective when people know they are placebos. In one study, researchers gave people suffering from irritable bowel syndrome sugar pills and told them that's all they were. Despite this, 59% of those tested reported relief of symptoms. The one problem with placebos is that while they are often effective for matters over which our mind has some control, they can't help with problems that lie below the conscious level. Placebos don't shrink tumours and they can't clear the plaque from narrowed arteries.
And that concludes this lecture, giving you a brief introduction to the physiology of pain. In this lecture, I started by reviewing the physiology of how nerve signals are created, and then gave you an example of how pain is transmitted from a sprained ankle and ultimately integrated in the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. I also talked about reflex arcs and gave some brief evidence for the management of pain and the placebo effect. This lecture was prepared for students in the UCD School of Public Health, Physiotherapy and Sports Science.